So when Pete Hegseth was with Fox, I had been introduced to him through a mutual friend, and I said, "Listen, I need help getting Job's case some light." Sent him everything. He read it all. Came back and said, "Yeah, this looks really bad on the Navy. There's no doubt what they're saying isn't true." He said to me, "Yeah, everything looks like it definitely wasn't suicide." So he's been very open with me,
right,
in that capacity. And he was going to help me introduce me to a bunch of print and legacy media editors and yada, yada. And then all of a sudden, ghost. And I said, "Listen, dude, I understand you're a busy guy, that you got a lot going on. But I said, I really need some connects." He said, "Well, I'll do an op-ed for Fox Digital. It's the best I can do for you." So I wrote something and didn't get picked up. And I said, "All right." And he goes, "Listen, man, I'm sorry I couldn't do more, but maybe down the road in a different capacity, I can help you." So I've been reaching out to Pete since he became the Secretary of Defense, saying, "Listen," sending screenshots. I'm like, "This is that moment. Yeah. When you said at some other point in time, in some other capacity, you might be able to help me, you're now in that capacity. Now's the time. You've seen all the evidence." The beginning of it. He didn't even know all the new evidence with the forensic stuff. But I said, just from what you've seen, that it's not right. You even said to me it didn't look like suicide. You said to me it looks real bad in the Navy. Why don't we fix this? So I'm hoping Pete sees this, because, and I've said this from the day I started, and I'll say it until it's over, that my only goal is to make Harry Price whole, even after his death, so that he knows that I completed the mission, that it's been proven that his son did not take his own life.
I'm Seth Hatena, a veteran journalist covering military and national security affairs, and this is the After Action Report. So I am joined today by Matt Cubbler. Matt, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks, buddy. Been looking forward to doing this.
Yeah, man. Why don't you introduce yourself? Who is Matt Cubbler?
Oh, good Lord. I am a retired police officer. I did 30 years in totality of law enforcement and 4 years of active duty Army intelligence during the first Gulf War, where I was deployed. 54, retired, enjoying retirement. People think I'm nuts for not really starting a second career, but I've been rode hard and put away wet, and I know that I probably don't have 30 more years left on this earth. So I'm going to try and get the most out of it as I can. But recently, and the reason why we're doing this podcast is, for the last 6 years, I've been investigating the suspicious death of Commander Job Price, who's the commander of SEAL Team 4. And through that investigation, it's opened up so many other rabbit holes that I've had to go down within the SEAL community and corruption, and within the brand of the SEAL Team Syndicate, as I call it. And unfortunately, I've been privy to a lot of information that I probably don't want to have in reality, but I need in order to help me with what I'm doing with Job.
Yeah. So you grew up in Pennsylvania, right?
Yeah, just outside of Philadelphia.
And that's how you met Job.
Yeah, Job and I were high school classmates in the same honors college prep classes. We're both on the academy track. He ended up going to the Air Force Academy. I ended up enlisting in the Army. But we were competitors in the classroom. He was significantly smarter than I was, and way more talented of a student and athlete, which is why he became so successful in the teams. But we weren't, we were classmates. We were friends. We liked each other. We said hello. But we didn't hang out after school. I wasn't, we weren't traditional friends by the metrics that most people would define a friend.
Right. He took an unusual path to the Navy SEALs. He was
Yeah.
through the Air Force Academy, and I just recently had dinner with someone who knew him in the Air Force Academy, and I think he was the honor man of the class there. I mean, he was kind of an exceptional person everywhere he went. Just really struck someone as, I mean, this person I met, tremendous integrity, above beyond reproach kind of person. And that's how you knew him too, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, Job was the guy, the nice guy. He was the one that he wasn't threatening to anybody, even though he was a larger kid. He was a wrestled heavyweight, was a lineman for the football team. Um, he he wasn't. I mean, he wasn't. He was athletically big, but he wasn't a bully. He didn't treat anybody poorly. He was welcoming to everybody, whether you were a minority or somebody who wasn't that smart or a nerd or whatever the case might be. He was always the guy that he was pretty much. He had a very wide array of friends within his circle, and he was an exceptional athlete and obviously an exceptional man based on his career as a servant to our country um, as a Navy SEAL.
Right. And were you still in Pennsylvania when he died?
Yeah. I didn't leave Pennsylvania until 2023. So when he died, which was December 22nd, 2012, and again, I liked Job. I admired Job. I was happy to say that we graduated together and that we knew each other because he was a significantly impactful person in our community. Like he was well revered by everybody, the politicians, the residents, and the school district. So when he died, everybody was shocked because they said it was suicide. And my first reaction was, "There's no fucking way." Just knowing Job, that wasn't even on if you gave me 1,000 ways that Job could have died, that would have been 1,001. And but again, I wasn't tight with the family. I knew Bronwyn a little bit.
Bronwyn's his sister, right?
Bronwyn's his sister, and I had lost a brother in 1989 in a car accident. So I'm now an only child, and so I just reached out to her and said, "Listen, I know what you're going through as far as loss and being an only child and feeling alone." I said, "If you need to talk, if you need anybody to vent to, I'm here." And so that started our friendship more intensely. And over the course of the years, she would reach out and she'd complain or bitch or vent or whatever, and I would just listen. And I told her I after she would hint that something just doesn't seem right. I still can't believe he committed suicide. I'm like, listen, I'm not gonna lie either, but that it sounds weird to me too. Like I don't buy it. But it wasn't until 2019 when I had a podcast at the time, and I said, "Hey, I'd love to have you on to tell Job's story. Just who was he as a person? Not necessarily. It doesn't have to be about his death or anything like that. Just from a sister's perspective, what was he like to you? Who was he through your eyes?" And she said, "Will you come to my parents' house and meet with me and my dad before we do
Right.
this?" And I said, "Okay." So I went over and I met with Harry, and I'd met him a couple times, but again, he wouldn't know much, if anything, about Matt Cubbler. I can tell you that much.
Yeah.
So we sat down, and he told me that Bronwyn trusts me and that I was helpful to her. And he's like, I know you've been a police officer for a long time. Would you take a look at Job's death book?
Yeah.
That's what it's called, a death book, and it's like 375 pages of reports and statements and forensic analysis and medical reports, medical examiners reports, things like that. So I said sure, and more so out of I was put on the spot, and
Yeah.
I didn't want to say no. So I took it home and I spent about a week with it, and I read it, and there wasn't a single stitch of evidence. There's anecdotal stuff, but nothing that was actually evidentiary that would hold up in a court of law that says that told me as an investigator that Job had committed suicide. I
And,
had
and and you looked. I mean, so you were in law enforcement. You'd seen a lot of crime scenes, right?
Oh yeah, I've seen a lot of dead bodies in 30 years
And
from all different reasons. Yeah.
this one didn't match up with anything that you'd seen.
Well, there was a lot of variables to why it didn't add up. Not the least of which was that there was just a lot of missing stuff from the book, like things that would be needed for someone to make a conclusion on cause of death, whether it was by one's own hand or someone else's. There was no lab reports for gunshot residue. There was no lab reports for DNA. There was no blood analysis reports. There was no ballistics on the gun. There was none of that was in this book that I was given.
Yeah.
So I'm like, just from that alone, I can't verify that Job even fired a gun, and that the gun that they said he was still holding was the gun that actually shot him. So that was like the first thing that stood out. The second thing that stood out was that, Job was found in his bunk, and this is, it means nothing in its individualness, but Job slept in the nude. And when you think about, suicide, and you think about I don't want to say typical, but in my experience, where a majority of those suicides are either pre-planned or reactionary. Reactionary is typically something happens and you go somewhere and kill yourself.
You break up with your girlfriend.
Right. Or you've thought about this and you've got a plan on how you're going to do it, and you say your goodbyes, you write your letters, or whatever.
The plan. Right?
Job slept in the nude. He slept on his left side. He slept with a pillow in the crook of his arm. I mean, literally like this. That's how he was found, on his back with his head facing to his right, with a gun on his chest, very precariously placed in his hand. But in the nude, the pillow was still in the crook of his arm, which indicates that it would be in the position where he would have been sleeping, based on his sister, his dad, his wife at the time, all verified that's kind of how he slept all the time. So I immediately was like, why would anybody, while they were planning to be asleep, all of a sudden just have a change of mind that, yep, this is what I'm going to do it. I'm going to commit suicide. So that just on a surface level just didn't seem to, the dots didn't connect there, at least not on their own merit. And, with any investigation, you look at those things and are like, all right, that's a red flag, but it may not be a red flag. There may be an explanation for it. And you go and you investigate and you dig. So read all the statements. There was a lot of similarities in wording and phraseology in the statements, which led me to believe that there was probably some collaboration, using certain words like aloof. That's not a typical word that people use in their daily vernacular, right? That's just not, it's not normal. People say weird, goofy. Aloof is a very specific word. And that was used a lot in multiple different statements. Not one person in any statement said that they felt he was suicidal. Not one person said that there was prior indication that he was suicidal. The only thing that was ever brought forward that could be used as a contextual explanation for suicide is they said he was depressed.
Right.
And that alone isn't a indicator of suicide. I mean, I've had depression. I know 1,000 people who have been depressed.
Yeah.
And they're almost all still alive.
Yeah.
So there's not a direct correlation between the two.
Right. Can I want to unpack some of those things there. So the fact that he was sleeping in the nude, he was a detail-oriented person, right?
Oh yeah.
And so, what did you read in that he's didn't have clothes on?
Well,
I guess what I'm asking is this: is if he had committed suicide, how would he have presented himself?
I think he would have done it in a professional manner. Job was a professional. Job was, by all accounts, the quintessential naval officer and Navy SEAL officer. He was on the admiral track. He was, in 6 months, he was scheduled to go to Rhode Island to a military school that was like prerequisite for that, the admiral level type track. So he had future plans outside of that deployment, being a commander of SEAL Team 4, that he was preparing for. Not to mention, he was married with a 9-year-old at the time, 9-year-old daughter, and this was 3 days before Christmas. Job was nothing if he wasn't conscientious. According to Bronwyn, he loved Christmas. So to ruin Christmas for his entire family for the rest of their lives isn't something that Job would do. I investigated this without any emotional connection. So, I don't cry when I think about Job. I was heartbroken in the fact that, a really brave American hero is dead. And there's some question about how he died, but it didn't change my course in my life in any way. So I looked at this from, if it's suicide, then I want to tell them it's suicide. If it's not, I'm going to tell them why it's not. And, that first week after looking at the book, I couldn't get to suicide. It's like they put a picture on the outside of the book and said, this is what happened. And inside the book is supposed to be all the puzzle pieces, right? It's like a 1,000-piece puzzle set. It's got a picture on the outside, and the inside, you take the puzzle pieces, put them together, it looks like the picture.
Right.
There are two problems with that. Number one, there wasn't enough puzzle pieces to get to the picture. And secondly, the picture that I ended up making out of all the puzzle pieces looked nothing like the picture that they're telling me happened.
Right.
So, and I had to find the puzzle pieces.
Right. Something else. Did anybody hear the shot that was fired?
No. And again, there's probably another 10 things we can discuss about why this case is bad. But it's a Green Mile. It's a very echoey metallic concrete structure.
Right.
The commander's office was right next to I don't know if it was the TOC or the commanding, wherever the main offices were for them.
Mm-hmm. The operations headquarters.
Basically. Yeah, the operations center headquarters. That was manned 24 hours a day. So there was somebody awake in that building. The last person who, in a statement, said they went to bed at 2 a.m. and hadn't heard anything. There was a report of what sounded like a pallet being dropped outside, it seemed like. So it didn't alert anybody. And that was around 2:30, which wasn't the person that went to bed at 2 that made that report. And then there were around 5:30 in the morning, someone said they smelled sulfur.
Right.
But didn't hear anything.
Right.
So these are highly alert, on edge,
in a war zone.
In a war zone, right?
Right. And an insider attack is a real threat there, right? If somebody hears a gunshot, they're going to jump out of bed and respond to it.
Right, because they're in a forward operating base, so they had tons of Afghani nationals in there that were partners, quote unquote. And again, I didn't want this to be a murder because I didn't want it. I certainly wasn't planning on spending 6 years of my life on it. But it just didn't make sense to me. How could nobody hear a gunshot in a building that you could? I mean, you clap your hands together, it's going to echo down the hall. Let alone a 9mm round going off unsuppressed, which Job's gun was an unsuppressed Sig 226. That would make a noise. That would be, if it wasn't silenced on some level, then it would have made a very loud noise. So that begs the question, was it his gun? Listen, I'm not accusing anybody of not being aware of their surroundings, but if you hear a loud bang and smell sulfur, I think that would inspire you to get the fuck up and see what the hell that was.
Well,
but he didn't.
And I've been overseas a lot, and even as a Green Beret, things always tend to happen. And we had a guy do a negligent discharge in his room during one deployment, and the whole SF camp knew it. It was in the middle of the night, and we all woke up and went and said, "What was that?" And
My bad.
Yeah, there is eyes super wide. I don't buy that a pistol round can go off unsuppressed in the middle of a team house and nobody and it not wake up the whole camp. It's a massive noise.
When you look at the gun, like when I looked at the crime scene photos, and again, I'm not a forensic expert. I know what looks right and what doesn't look right. I don't always know why it's right or not right, but that's just experience of seeing things. But there are detailed level stuff that I now know from our forensic experts that have come forward as to what actually happened in that room, but all based on blood evidence and trajectories and physics and things of that nature. But if nobody heard a gunshot, then that means it had to be suppressed, whether it's suppressed with a pillow or suppressed with a silencer,
Or
something
both.
muffled
Yeah.
or both, muffled a sound. So then you have to look at the gun and say, okay, could this gun have somehow been used to commit a crime, to commit suicide or a crime? And for suicide, and based on the contact type wound that he had on his right temple, there would have been significant blood, brain matter, skin, bone fragments in the barrel of the gun, on the slide of the gun, on his hand, just based on the amount of gas that gets pushed back when it hits a solid bone, especially area. So the gun didn't have anything. There's no visible blood or anything on the gun in the crime scene photos. And Job's hand might have had, and I didn't count them exactly, but maybe 8 pinprick size blood drops on his knuckles. And the only one that didn't have any blood on it was his trigger finger. Which, there would have been a lot more blood and a lot more fragments and a lot more stuff on his forearm, on his hand, on the wall behind him, on everything around him. There would have been more than what there was. But again, I didn't have any ballistics reporting to tell me whether or not the bullet they found in the most precarious place under his bed, he had a bunch of Pelican boxes.
Right.
And there was literally, if the bed was a twin bunk, there was probably a 1 foot by 1 foot area in the upper left corner where you would lay your head, where there was no Pelican box. And that's the area where the blood had pooled down from the bed onto the floor. And somehow, and they were never able to show how the trajectory, where the bullet went and where the ricochets could have gone. And you would be able to see the ricochets, and everything would have a mark on it of some sort, especially from a projectile. How it ended up behind Pelican boxes and in the pool of blood that had puddled underneath his bed. And the casing was found under his body.
Right.
Which is very difficult, according to forensics, impossible to happen.
Right. And I also want to just touch on the position of his body. That struck you as unusual too. So maybe you can just kind of walk people through it. He was shot. Where was he shot, and how was his body found?
So based on the trajectory that was outlined by the NCIS agents in their report, he was shot downward on an angle, probably 45 degrees ish. He was laying on his left side. The bullet went through his right temple, through his left temple, through the pillow, it hit the mattress, hit the frame of the bed, and then bounced around a bunch, apparently. So he was laying on his left side. Behind him was a wall. The bed was abutting against a wall. So probably 12 inches behind him was the wall. When he was found lying on his back. So as if his body had returned back to a supine position, right?
Right.
And he was laying with the right hand at a 45-degree angle across his chest with the gun under his chin level, just slightly under his chin. The hammer was still back. His finger was still precariously in the trigger, but it was like this far up away from his hand. So it wasn't a fully seated weapon in his hand.
Right.
His head was then also facing the opposite direction. So he was laying like this. And there was blood on the pillow and all in that area where the exit wound was. And then there was blood that was forming up here, which is what ended up underneath the bed in the upper left corner, if you're looking at it from the foot of the bed, where it pulled underneath where the bullet was found.
Right.
So there was And I
So
will say that
his body moves significantly after he shot himself.
yes, and there has yet to be, and I've talked to forensic experts. There's not a biomechanically, gravitationally explainable way for the shooting position with a recoil for the gun to end up where it ended up in his hand and his arm to be where it was found.
Right.
It's virtually impossible
Right.
for that to have happened. So that was also, a giant red flag. And then the biggest of them all, as I got into the meat of this and started reading all the notes from the NCIS agent, is that when Job was found dead by Jeff Peeler, who was the command master chief, who was also the last one to see him alive at about 11:30 the night before. So this is around 9:30ish. Job is found. He then goes and gets the brass that were on from the team and say, hey, this is what we got.
Yeah.
They all came in. Jesse Boggs, who was the NCIS agent, he just happened to be in the building. They bring him in. Then they bring the doc in to do a time of death. So roughly an hour goes by for all that to happen.
Right.
Jesse Boggs, who was an NCIS officer, tells Jeff Peeler, they lock the door to Job's room, and he gives the key to Jeff Peeler and says, don't let anyone in here.
Yeah.
I'll be back with more men. Well, I don't care if it's a forward operating base in Afghanistan or, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Law enforcement 101 is once you're in law enforcement and you establish a crime scene, that's your crime scene. You do not relinquish that crime scene to anyone other than law enforcement. And you certainly don't leave it to the command master chief, the senior enlisted guy for the team, who was the last one to see him alive and the first one to find him dead, to have control over the crime scene for 9 hours before anyone in law enforcement comes back. So from any level of prosecutorial through to the poisonous tree or evidence chain of custody or whatever you want to look at it from, everything about that is contaminated. Mm-hmm. There isn't a single thing that could be utilized in a court of law to say that this is how it was when it was found, because there's no photographs taken. There was no itemized inventory. Nothing was done except locking a door and then 9 hours go by.
Right.
And that's a huge, 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 not just a complete blunder by Jesse Boggs, but it was almost so bad that it was so good. If you'd catch my drift, like that investigation was so inherently bad that it was perfect. Because everything that could have been used to prove otherwise, whatever the narrative they were deciding was at the time was going to be, which they laid to rest on suicide, you couldn't disprove or prove it in a court of law. Like you couldn't go into any court and convince anybody that what you're saying is true or what they're saying is true. Nobody knows what's true because we don't know what happened for 9 fucking hours.
Right. Right.
And that's a gigantic gap in the story.
Right.
It'd be different if they wasn't found for 9 hours and was found 9 hours later, and that's when they started investigating. They found him and left him there for 9 hours. And I'll add this because I know you probably want to jump in. I can tell your brain's moving a million miles an hour here. The one thing that is really, really important for people to understand is that guilty people don't cover up things. They just don't. I mean, not guilty people.
Yeah.
Cover up things. Only the guilty people do. So when the investigation was done, when the crime scene was processed, poorly, but processed, Jesse Boggs tells Jeff Peeler that no one is to touch the body after it gets released to the medical people. Right. And in his notes, Jesse Boggs' notes, he says, after I said this, it is my belief that he had no intentions of following that order.
Wow.
And he did.
So you're reviewing all this stuff. I mean, some of it you learn later, but a lot of these initial impressions came to you when you reviewed the death book, and you go back to Harry Price, and what happens? How did you? What led you to where you are now?
Well, I could sense, and listen, I've talked to a lot of grieving families in my life, from babies that die in the pool to people that are murdered or killed in a car accident or whatever.
Yeah.
I've had to break bad news to people, and I can see, I lost my brother, and I know how it affected my mom. When you lose somebody tragically in a way that you weren't anticipating, right? At least with Job, it was at war. You kind of knew there was a chance that things could go bad, but you hope for the best. But I could sense Harry was struggling, and that he really, really believed that his son would never commit suicide. And I didn't want to be the guy that gave him hope if I didn't honestly believe what I believed. I would never, um, I would never give false hope to somebody in that way. I've had multiple Gold Star families reach out to me and ask me to look at their lost seal um, case where they believe there was also improprieties. And I've never been paid for anything I do. I don't ever ask for money. I never would. I don't have a nonprofit. I don't have a GoFundMe. This is just me with a quest. And everyone asks me if how much will it cost? I'm like, well, if I do it, it won't cost you anything because I don't sell hope. Right? I'm not charging you for hope.
Right. That's
You know,
would be the most cruel thing you could do if
yeah.
you did that.
So, but Harry needed hope, and I honestly believe that something definitely wasn't suicide. At least not I couldn't get there yet. So that's kind of what I told him. I said, listen, I'll keep digging. And he introduced me to a couple of people that had, provided him with some side stuff. And, that started I wouldn't say it wasn't a full-time effort for me in the beginning. It wasn't until probably 2020 when COVID hit, when I ran a bunch of gyms that I owned on top of being a cop, and they had closed. So I had all this free time, and I started using the free time to look into Job's case. And that's kind of when I really started to push hard. And then I hit a wall. I can only get so far with, I'm not in the military. I'm not a direct information receiver like Job's wife was. At this point, she had backed out and was no longer participating in what I was doing, and so my access point went with it, and everything had to go through FOIA, and FOIAs weren't responding. I was getting either the typical, we can't give out that information because they're the fact that they were leaving is classified, whatever. I get all the nonsensical responses, and I wasn't getting any answers.
Welcome to my world. Yeah.
Yeah. So I in 2022, I kind of just paused. Let me go back before I even go down that road. When Jesse Boggs said, "I don't believe they're going to follow that order," what happened after that was the ultimate insurance policy for the people involved in Job's death. They went into the medical tent along with the medical personnel. They took the bags off of Job's hands, which were sealed with evidence tape.
To preserve gunshot residue, or just so people understand.
And supposedly, they said they tested, and I'll tell you what they actually tested. But in the report said GSR swabs were taken, and DNA collection, and weapon was taken, and the round and the casing for ballistics testing. But I just didn't have those reports. So they, at the medical tent, in collaboration with one another, the SEALs and medical people took Job's. And these medical people, I've talked to many people who had similar roles in forward operating bases, and they said they're taught on how to handle dead bodies like that. That's especially for preservation of evidence. Right. You got to have a medical examiner. Nobody touches anything. That body's on lockdown. So the fact that these SEALs were able to manipulate the medical people into it tells me that there was probably more of an incestuous relationship between the two, and including Jesse Boggs, who I believe wanted to be so much loved by the SEALs that he would do anything they asked. They washed his whole body. They washed his hands. They removed any trace evidence or physical evidence that could have been on his body. That, the whole body is an evidence vessel. That's why they put it in the body bag. Everything as found, his bed sheets, everything goes into the body bag because everything
is
gets
supposed to go in the body bag.
Yeah. So they dressed him in his uniform, put him a watch cap on him, bandaged his wounds, and then rebagged his hands. Like, I don't understand. That was the part where I go, that's deception. That's not, I fucked up and I didn't know. That's, these are supposed to be on there. Let's put them back on. Right? Evidence bags. Because if you look at the pictures of Job's hands at the crime scene and Job's hands when he was taken out of the body bag in the medical examiner's office, there's no blood anywhere on Job's body. Even the microscopic specks that were on his hand were gone. So, and even the ME had some questions about a lot of the things that he saw as to how is the body in this condition. However, he allowed the influence from the SEALs to dictate that it was in fact suicide. So, moving forward in 2022, I hit a wall. I had all this information. I knew in my soul that somebody did something to Job, and Job didn't do it to himself. I wasn't getting any response from any of the people I was trying to reach from his team. The wife wasn't helping. Harry was in bad health. And I just had to take a pause and just recollect. It was probably at like almost the end of 2022. So for half of 2023, I didn't really do anything. And I got a phone call from somebody who asked if I wanted to look at another case. So I'm like, I got nothing going on. Yeah, I'll look at it. And I just kind of got my juices going again. And then I had the opportunity to interview Rob O'Neill on the Jeremy Slayton, Jay Slay USA podcast. And, what I realized after doing those three different interviews over 3 different time periods, but the first one was basically about the Bin Laden raid and how I questioned him. I was the only person on video, at least, to ever publicly question Rob O'Neill's accounts of what happened that day.
Don't try to name people because not everyone at SEAL Team 6 is as jovial as I am.
No, I get it, but please understand that the depth of knowledge of which I've been briefed, I'm aware of who he is.
Okay.
And I'm not trying to out anybody, but I also need to understand the complexities of the story, which have the point man, we'll call him. And we're not going to name names. I'm not going to drop a name on this podcast because I do respect that part, but I do know his name. And if you want, I can text you and you can verify it or not. But
trust you.
Because I had him cornered, he agreed to do 2 more shows about multiple different topics. One being Job. We talked about extortion. We talked about Robert's Ridge, and we talked about Lone Survivor. And I got him on tape talking about those things in a critical manner, which is what I wanted. I just wanted him saying some things that I needed him to say about things. And then a lot of that went viral. Multiple clips went viral. And that got me onto the Anti-Hero podcast because they had just done a show with Brent Tucker, the host, who wasn't a host at the time when he did the Rob O'Neill episode. But
they were very critical of Rob O'Neill, right?
Very much so. And everybody in the community, especially in the tier 1 level, knows that Rob's full of shit.
Right.
I'd been privy to the audio recording, a piece of the audio recording, where Rob O'Neill doesn't take credit for killing Bin Laden. And
is this the debrief? Is that
right after just with the ground people, not with the bigger guys.
So I got to ask you, man, so that like extraordinary level of access that very few people, how do you do that? How have you been able to get, I remember at one time, Rob is even saying like, he's impressed with how much you know.
If I'm going to be honest, man, you definitely have good sources. I'm impressed.
Right. How do you get all that knowledge?
I'm good to my sources. I keep them very anonymous, as I know you are. I don't know. I think I'm a good investigator. I think I'm very good at dealing with people and understanding people and reading people and manipulating when I need to. But I also believe that I'm also believable. Like I'm not a paid person. I'm just a guy that's trying to help a dad out, right, and solve a complex problem that nobody wants to talk about.
Right.
And I think people see that and have seen that. And it's been this way for the last 6 years, and they go, okay, I can get behind that. And when I say I need something for an interview, and I know you have it, it stays. You will never be exposed as the person that gave it to me, and I will never say enough about what it is for anybody to know or try to connect the dots back to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's kind of how I was able to get that. And then I said, I don't want a copy of it. I don't need any of it. I said, I'm good. Just I need to hear it. I want to know what he said so that when I ask him about it, I want to hear his response.
Right.
And
You just want the information. Yeah.
And he confirmed what I heard. So,
Wow. So let me just ask you the question everybody's wondering probably at this point is, who killed Joe Price?
Well, first of all, if you know who did, you can go to whokilledjobprice.com.
Yeah, well, I'll put that up in
We have a website, and there's links to on my investigative team that they'll talk in and get back to you. So, on its own merit, if Job was an isolated case, it'd be very difficult for me, not knowing the community, not knowing the landscape of what was going on during the GWAT era, not understanding the players in the games and who was dealing with what and who was doing what. It would have been hard for me to attack the problem in a confident way had I not been exposed to all these other incidents and seen the patterns. Right? When you start to see the individuals involved, the leadership, who was moving up and down and who was attached to who and all that stuff, and then seeing the how cover-ups were accomplished, and you see the pattern of how they do that and how they just keep repeating it. And it's no different than any other government. First of all, you don't address it ever, right? Ignore. That's the first thing they do. They just don't acknowledge the conversation. They won't. It's what they've been. That's how they've kept Roberts Ridge supposedly not a solved event. People believing that it's still not solved when it's completely 100% verifiably what happened is very easily proven. So when it comes to Job, there were multiple layers to his death. We'll start with Job the person first. Job was not your typical SEAL officer. He wasn't, in baseball you have players coaches, and right, he wasn't a players coach.
Right.
He wasn't there to make you happy. He wasn't there to appease you and make you feel special. He didn't care if you wanted your hair long and wear t-shirts on ops. He didn't care about that. He's like, we're a military fucking unit. You're going to act like one. We are the tip of the spear, not some roughshod gang from the hood. We are professionals in what we do, and we're going to look like professionals. We're going to train like professionals. We're going to act like it.
Yep.
Rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. A lot. One in particular, and I like to shout him out anytime I get on a podcast. Rob Huberty, you can go fuck yourself. He made it a point to go on podcasts to besmirch Job Price, and just there wasn't a reason for him to do that. It's not like anybody was going after Rob Huberty and trying to blame him for anything. He just went on a mission to crush Job Price's name. And for me, you're a coward if you do that.
He took his job really, really seriously, too seriously. I think I have sympathy now for him, but I hated him.
Oh, interesting.
I hated him, and so did everyone else. I know why now, but I couldn't see it then. And it's because he wanted to be the best he could be. He wanted to be perfect. He was a guy who was not going to leave his office until late in the morning on stuff that I feel is fairly inconsequential. How your PowerPoint deck looked, how this does. He was a tireless tyrant.
And yeah, and it also tells me that you probably might know something,
Mhm.
that you might be trying to get out in front of it, that you may be trying to put out an alternative narrative. So Rob Huberty, contact me. My email will be in the notes. I can't stand him, but I'm trying to troll him into contacting me. It hasn't worked yet. But he hated Job for those specific reasons. Said he was just an asshole. But if you ask anybody that has ever worked with Job outside of this deployment, you would not get that response. He was a professional. He was a detail-oriented, driven, outwork everybody, loved his job, loved his country. That's just what everybody. So that the first layer is that he pissed off a lot of people. So you have to have an unhappy populace in order to ultimately end up getting murdered. So the second thing was they had relieved Team 2, which was commanded by Mike Hayes. Team 2 had a pretty shitty deployment. There was a lot of allegations of rape and drugs and murder within members of the team. And there was actually one specific case that Job was actually brought in on, where members of the team and the Afghan local police had brought in an Afghani and they basically tortured the shit out of him. And
Like drop rocks on his chest and
oh,
did
yeah.
MMA moves on him and stuff like that, right?
Shot gunshots around him. Just they beat the living piss out of him. And they cut him loose, and he died a few hours later back in the village.
Right.
So
Can I jump in here? Like,
yeah, please.
One thing I read about that deployment that always stuck with me is that, a lot of soldiers, and not just SEALs, but soldiers and Marines would give out candy to local children. And these guys would go around and I think with a slingshot and shoot candy at children.
Mm-hmm.
That's a different level of.
And the one that Job was on was Kalash. It was KLACH, I think. Kalash murder. Job, when he was there before the whole team came over, he went over for pre-deployment, basically getting the lay of the land, working with his counterpart, Mike Hayes, just trying to figure out the local situation and all that. So when that happened, Job was brought in to be another set of eyes for the court-martial, or whatever their version is of that, to decide whether or not it would go to court-martial.
Right.
And Job helped to draft the review paperwork for that. What came from that was two things. Some local military guys, our U.S. Army guys, heard radio chatter from the Taliban that there was going to be a retaliation or retribution for what happened to Kalash. And that information was never shared with Job. So Job leaves after he's done his pre-deployment thing. They come back, relieve the base that Team 2 was at, was moved 60 miles, 60 clicks away to Tarancote, which is where Job ended up having his forward operating base. But at no point in time did any of that information about retaliation become known to Job. Right. There were two, during Job's deployment, he had 4 people die. There were 2 Army guys that died. And they were like psychological ops guys. They weren't special forces, but and I think this was an Army FOB, an Army controlled FOB where they were at. And then Matt Cantor dies. And that one was more of just happened. It wasn't like wasn't any like bad, like it was an ambush or anything like that. It just was they were out on a mission and he died. But Kevin Everett died in an ambush.
Right.
And that's the one that really got to Job the most, I think, because
Yep.
he had a soft spot for Kevin, was trying to help him, you know, become a doctor. And like, there's a lot of things Job was trying to help him. And Kevin really admired Job, according to his family and everybody that I've spoken to that knew of their relationship. So I think that one hit him hard. And so when you hear the people say that he was depressed about that, I can see that. I can understand why that would be something that would haunt Job a little bit. Certainly not to the point where he would kill himself, but I think it would certainly be something that Job would regret, and second guess himself on, I'm sure. So those four guys died, which when you're looking at as a commander on your first tour, your first deployment as a commander, it's not the best way to go, right? Having four people die is not necessarily good for your overall deployment grade, which they all get graded on. So Job, they took over September. By November, I can't remember the exact date, is when Everett died. Middle of December, Tim Szymanski, Bob Smith, and his name is escaping me at the moment. The third guy was an admiral. Maybe it'll pop in your head. Shows up in country, and Job and Tim Szymanski got into it.
All right. Let's back up a bit. You have Alone at Dawn on the shelf behind you there, the book about Robert's Ridge.
Uh-huh.
You said you started seeing patterns,
Mm-hmm.
and that you wouldn't have been able to put all the pieces together about Job's death without seeing those patterns. The patterns start with that book, right? They start on Robert's Ridge, and you're wearing the Mako 30C shirt to honor John Chapman, and that is. Do you see that as kind of the origin story for all this?
Yeah, I call it the original sin. It's my little term I give to it. And when you think about the global war on terror, there was because this was March of 2002 the war had just started. It was not. We're not 12 years later, 10 years later, right? So
That's right. Bin Laden had just escaped at Tora Bora. I mean, it was all fresh in everybody's mind. 100%.
And everybody that was trying to make a name for themselves, especially in the special operations community, wanted to be the one to get Bin Laden. And a lot of decisions were made that day that, by all accounts, were based on hubris and ego and manipulation. And the mission to land on the mountain in Takurgar was a pathetically poorly drawn up mission that should have never happened and was refused by multiple different units. And then also, not to mention the Delta guys that had been up on that mountain already said, yeah, you shouldn't come up here. This is bad.
Right. And the Delta guys were cut out of the communications loop deliberately so the SEALs could get their toehold in this mission, right?
And that's where you see the beginning pattern of Tim Szymanski is not only was he the ops officer for that mission, he had leverage that he shouldn't have had. Like, if you just look at who he is, what rank he was, like, he shouldn't have that much leverage at JSOC, right? That there shouldn't be that much influence, especially over senior Delta guys and like people that's their job, is to do those kinds of missions. Navy SEALs were not created to do that kind of mission specifically. Like, they're not mountain trained. That's just not their terrain they work on. And yet Tim Szymanski was able to weasel his way in and wedge out the true experts in that type of a mission and put his team, SEAL Team 6, in there. And the rest is history with what happened in that. And there's people that will still say that Rich Slavinsky's a hero and that what he did that day was heroic and he deserves a Medal of Honor. And I would just argue that the video evidence says otherwise.
Right.
It's just us.
Right. And the video evidence is the key here, right? That first of all, no one was, I think SEAL Team 6, it's now pretty clear, never thought anybody would see that video evidence. It was kind of a fluke that it came out. But once it did, I mean, it's a pretty clear picture of what happened. You just can see John charging up the mountain. You can see John taking out an enemy bunker. You can see John getting knocked unconscious, and then John getting left behind. It's all there. But the reason and the reason why that Chapman Slabinski story has gained such traction is a large part because of that video. I think that the challenge with Job, there's no video, right? How do you convince people when there's no visual evidence for them to see?
It has been a monumental task. When you're looking at patterns and you see how Tim Szymanski was able to make that mission happen and then also cover up that mission. So he created the opportunity. He planned the operation. He didn't own any of his fuck ups, got promoted, found his way into higher and higher and higher positions within naval special warfare.
Becoming vice admiral ultimately, yeah.
Yeah. And being able to, along the way, influence other events that occurred that were of dubious distinction between 2002 and 2012 when Job was killed. And you see where Tim Szymanski's footprint is on everything. And then you see the manner in which not just Roberts Ridge, but the wedding convoy,
the massacre, yeah.
The lone survivor, like Ramadi, like you name it, the different events that have occurred and how they were able to change the narrative to fit their needs, which is, at that time. And listen, I'm not immune to the fact that recruiting is important, right? They were using these guys, these missions, failed or otherwise, as recruiting tools. Courageous men doing courageous things on mountaintops far, far away. People die, but yet they're heroes, right? So it's the tried and true. Let's build up. Let's make sure that people believe a certain thing. There's nobody that's going to go against it, at least not at the time. And they also know that over time, if it does come out, people aren't going to care as much.
Right.
Time and distance heals all wounds, right? So, but my goal, and just on John Chapman specifically, is to make it hurt even worse now for them. Like I want shame, I want embarrassment, I want everybody impacted, because you don't get to get away with it for 23 years and just get a slap on the wrist. I want heads to roll, and that's why I've been such an advocate for this, is because I'm not dumb. It's the most palatable for most people to look at and consume and go, yeah, I can see what he's saying, right? There's going to be interpretations of what happened with Marcus Luttrell, even though he's pretty much Mountain said it already. There's going to be interpretations about Chris Kyle, but they've already made movies about them, and people are like, I think he was a hero. I war breaks people. I can see why he was that. Everybody's got their excuses built in because they've already built the character within the Hollywood framework. John's never did. John's is just simple facts and a video that is taken from an ISR feed that was, thank God, Frank Daly was able to piece that thing together. Right.
That's right.
So it's the most palatable to most people. So I can champion that publicly, knowing that the thing that I can stand on, anybody can look at and make a determination with any level of logic and go, yeah, that looks like what happened.
Right.
Show me where Britt did whatever, and you can't. There's not a single stitch of video evidence. It's not like the video turned off. It's not like it just doesn't exist. It never happened. So, but when it comes to Job, and the connection point, obviously, is Tim Szymanski. And Tim's influence over everyone. I mean, Tim had spent 10 years now building up the brand that is the Navy SEAL, the corrupt syndicate within the Navy SEAL community that allowed for war crimes to happen, that promoted people who commit them, that awarded people who did criminal activity. The best way to not get in trouble is to promote an award. Nobody's going to give a promotion or an award to somebody who's a criminal, are they?
Right.
Hide behind the hide behind the
medals.
back, behind the award, hide behind whatever, right?
Yeah.
And it's it's not just in the Navy. I mean, cops do it. I mean, it's been done for a long time. So they're not reinventing the wheel. It's something that it works, right? But it ain't fixed. It ain't broke. Don't fix it. So
Yeah.
when Tim Szymanski and God, I still can't remember his name. It's gonna kill me. Pybus. Sean Pybus.
Sean
So
Pybus.
Sean Pybus, Bob Smith, and Tim Szymanski were in country.
And just for people who don't know, those are all, I think Pybus took over as head of Naval Special Warfare.
Right.
Tim Szymanski was also a future or head of Naval Special Warfare. And Bob Smith is a captain. They're all very senior SEALs coming to see.
Influential SEALs who all are interconnected with each other.
Right.
And exist because of each other.
And do you know what that shouting match, what was that about?
So Job had found out, well, multiple things. The retribution killing of Kevin Everett. The missing ASOT money.
What is ASOT?
It's basically CIA money that's used for multiple things. Paying off mullahs, getting information. If you kill somebody's family member accidentally, there's a fee for that, right? You pay them off. This money was used for a lot of different functions.
And it's a pool of cash that they have available to them.
Yeah, it's almost like a giant ATM without a debit card required.
Right.
And there's somebody who is in charge of that money within SEAL Team 4 and any other organization. It was a warrant officer who was in charge of that. And, I've spoken to this warrant officer and I've explained to him the allegation of the missing money. And he assured me that his books are correct. And I said, well, I've also spoken to people that explain to me how those books can be correct without them being correct. It's not like we're dealing with bank transactions where it's all computer. It's all take a piece of paper. It's a printed out receipt, essentially saying we're giving you this much money. You sign here, you bring it back. We put it in a file. Those things can be signed by anybody, and no one's going to know the difference. They're not going to know the difference between Mullah X and Mullah Y, or Alp, or anybody. Any Afghan national that signs it, it's going to be accepted and put in the book.
Right.
So there was $30,000 to $40,000 missing. There was a former SEAL Team 6 guy who was kicked out of command and was ultimately reassigned to Job's team. That I was told, Wemo is what he went by.
Wemo's his team name?
Team name, yeah. That he was responsible for that money being missing. And
what was he doing with that money?
I don't know what he was doing with the specific $30,000 to $40,000. I do know that he was using that money as his own little cachet of funds, and this is according to the warrant officer, that he had pretty much gone rogue and was just taking money whenever he felt like it, and there really wasn't much of an accounting. And whoever was the person underneath the warrant officer who was responsible for the accounting portion of this, he wasn't very good at his job.
Right.
So I think the argument with Job and Szymanski was about that. And Job was, there was a message he had sent to his wife a few days before he died that there were some bad things happening over there that he was going to have to address when he got back. But he didn't get into specifics with it. Mm-hmm. And then another person that I spoke to verified that he had had conversations with Job about some of the things that were happening there. And it was troubling Job that, as a commander, it's not good, first of all, the 4 guys die, and it's certainly not good that you have all this corruption and all that happening also underneath you.
You mentioned that he was, that some people really graded under his leadership, that he was a demanding, exacting commander. Do you think he was doing that because that he was really trying to restore some order to that place, that things had gotten that so out of hand?
Well, I mean, this was, 3 months is basically they were in country before Job died. And what I actually believe is that he saw what happened with SEAL Team 4. I mean, SEAL Team 2, that was there prior to him, and how
Commanded by
badly
Mike
things went
Hayes.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah, led by Mike Hayes, who's on the board of the Medal of Honor Museum. Just a little side note. And Mike was basically relieved of duty. He retired after that deployment. He was told, your service is no longer needed. Just kind of like what happened to Jocko after he came back from Task Unit Bruiser. Shortly thereafter, he was asked to resign. But they all land on their feet. They all somehow land on their feet. So, but I think Job was taking the lessons learned from SEAL Team 2, and then seeing how his guys were trying to mimic that type of an environment, and especially when they know guys. These guys all know each other. It's not like it's not a very large community. So guys on SEAL Team 2 know guys on SEAL Team 4. They've all served on different teams together at some point in time for the most part. So, and then I think he knew that there was some shit happening, right? There was some grumblings. There were people that weren't happy. There's, people not showing up for their meetings on time, like just a lot of lack of military discipline happening. And I think he just wanted to put an end to it. Like, we're not doing this. And from everything that I've been told, I have not spoken to Wemo yet. But he was kind of like, the rogue SEAL Team 6 guy that you would think there would be some sort of a character in a movie about. He was kind of that guy. Just sort of did his own thing, didn't care about rules or regulations, just sort of felt like he was above all that. So Job approached him 2 days before Job died and said, you have 48 hours to return that money. And 48 hours later, Job was dead.
Right.
And again, I have my beliefs on who killed Job just based on motive and opportunity, and some conversations I've had with some people. But I also know that absent a confession, it's going to be very difficult to prove, because I said early on that the investigation was so bad that it was perfect. Because all of the physical evidence that could have tied someone to the murder of Job Price, someone or multiple someones, was destroyed, lost, altered, multiple different ways the evidence was tarnished. And even if there was a piece of evidence that I could use, and I'm not trying to ruin my own, I'm just being honest. I don't win anything here other than my ego at the end of this. I fulfill a promise, and if I'm proven right, then my ego will be patted on the back. The reality is that if we went into a court of law and I had any DNA evidence, I can't account for its origin. I can't say that the chain of custody was not broken.
Yeah.
There's no way to do that, because they were so poorly organized, and the investigator was so inept, but yet so perfectly inept, that they were able to lose photographs on discs. Only one disc existed for the photographs that I would want that would show brain matter and blood splatter on a wall 10 to 12 inches behind Job. Those pictures are gone, not to be found again. Why? Because they were only on one disc and no copies were ever made. Very convenient. Blood evidence, DNA, GSR, all gone. Oh, and I forgot to mention.
Oh, yeah. What about his personal effects? Do you want to touch on that?
Burned. So his
burned?
Yeah, they were burned. So I was told by a source that two things happened during the 9 hour, two specific things happened during that 9 hour period where the SEALs had control of Job's room and body. Number one, the order to not go in the room was certainly not adhered to. They went in the room.
Yeah.
Photos were taken of the crime scene early on, and I believe certain things were adjusted to match the crime scene photos that were then taken 9 hours later. There was before photos and then after photos taken, and the after photos were the ones that were then shared with NCIS to prove that the room was in the same condition as when they found it. And that's just through source. That's not in an NCIS note,
Right.
but that's the source that happened. Secondly, that they an order was given to go and gather up all Job's personal belongings. Anything that could make them look bad was what was said. And they were collected and burned.
Wow.
And I don't know what those things were specifically, but you don't go in and burn things. And that happened with another case as well, where SEALs were ordered to go into a crime scene and remove items from a crime scene that would make the Navy or Navy SEALs look bad.
Right.
And then they were burned. So, and that's happened on multiple occasions, but I know for one specifically, 6 years later, that it happened the same way.
Yeah, I mean the patterns are just what, like back to Roberts Ridge. I mean they literally try to confiscate the ISR footage, but luckily there's a copy that Frank Daly, the Air Force analyst, has uploaded, and that becomes the evidence that shows John to be the hero that he was. In the Joe Price case, though, burning someone's effects, there is a couple of things that survived though that weren't burned. Right, there's a photo of his daughter, and then there's a piece of paper in his back pocket. What?
Yeah, it was just there was nothing of, it wasn't anything of value. Like it wasn't it wasn't a note. It was a letter. It was about the kid that was killed.
Right.
But it wasn't, I mean, to me, that all they were trying to make it look like that he was sad. Like that was the real, like he was looking at those two things. He was thinking about his daughter and this kid that was killed, and that's why he did it. That's what they were trying to piece that together.
Well,
Make those
is there another interpretation though that the kid in his back pocket was something that had stuck there because he was onto something happening?
Oh, absolutely. Well, yeah, because I mean, there is obviously the allegations against Team 2, where there was a young Afghani boy that was apparently raped and killed, and then they threw his body over the wall of a compound. And there's other very similar, like sadistic, twisted shit that you go, man, how could any human being do that to another person? But when you, and again, this is not an excuse for anybody, but I'm very critical of our government in that when you have a protracted 20-year-long war and you keep rotating in your soldiers and warfighters into that environment where it's the high likelihood of killing somebody is there, and you kill enough people over time, you become a killer. You don't have the ability to turn that on or off. You don't have the discernment between good and evil that starts to become really blurred. And I think over time that happened to a lot of guys. Doesn't excuse anything that they did, but I'm not blind to the fact that our government sent these men over to go do some heinous shit and expected them to come back and be completely functional members of society. Right. But what they're not doing is they're not holding them accountable. They want to send them over to do the heinous shit and then not ask questions. That's the McRaven way, right? McRaven's well known for turning the blind eye to all the shit that was going on under his command and walking out of rooms when conversations that might end up being something that he might have to handle later on, walking out of the room so he doesn't have to hear about it. He was known for that. He's not known as the guy that says, make your bed every morning. He's the guy that allowed it to fester and become what it is by just simply ignoring it. Another guy, Colin Green, who was a good friend of Job's.
That's right.
Wrote a letter to Harry saying he was one of the best men I've ever known. They roomed together in Spain and rode us Spain on a deployment. We will never forget him. he allowed Jocko to run amok in Ramadi. He was the on-scene commander. He was I don't know what the exact title was while he was over there, but he was the boss. He actually left country because it was so bad that he didn't want to see it. He didn't want to be a part of it. Like that's the leadership that gets promoted to the highest ranks possible within the naval special warfare community. Guys like that. Sean Pybus. Sean Pybus knows what happened. I've reached out to Sean. Sean won't talk to me. That's why I'm saying his name. If he would have talked to me, we could have kept his name out of all this. But there's people that are, and I know they know, right? They're aware that I know they know the answer.
Yeah. Can I stick with another name, Mike Hayes? So we've touched on him a couple of times. He was the commander of Team 2 that Job's unit relieved in Afghanistan. You mentioned he's also on the board of all things of the National Medal of Honor Museum, which has decided to honor Britt Slabinski at the expense of John Chapman. I think you visited, right? And he's on a far wall there, shoehorned into a timeline, basically. But there's a third thing. I don't know if you want to get into this, but you touched on how the wife, doesn't really want a part of this. Does Mike Hayes have something to do with that?
He hand delivered a check. I can tell you that much. Hundreds of thousands of dollars.
To who?
To Job's wife.
Where did he get that money from?
I don't know. I'm assuming because I've spoken to other Gold Star family members who have received $750,000 from the Navy SEAL Foundation. And I know on at least one occasion, they didn't even know it was coming. They were just called and said, check your bank account. Wow. And there was $750,000 in the bank account. And the expectation that comes with that, based on multiple conversations with multiple Gold Star families, is that they are to be loyal to the foundation and to the SEALs. That they are to not question whatever the official narrative was for their lost loved one. I know a couple that have received the money and are still questioning, as they should. Listen, if you want to give me $750,000, I'm still not shutting up, right? Do I know for a fact that the money is why Job's wife stopped helping me? No, because she won't talk to me. Is the timing dubious? Yes. And again, she's basically said she's Switzerland.
She's neutral.
Right? She's going to land on wherever the winning side is. If we don't ever get a chance to prove Job was murdered, she'll be like, I told you guys, you were trying to prove something that didn't exist. Or if I prove that he was murdered, I always knew he was murdered. She'll pick whatever side is the winning side. And again, that's on her. I don't begrudge her. I don't have anything. She isn't helping me. But there's nothing she can do to hurt me. So I don't have any anger towards her. I just wish she would have been more passionate about her husband's death at a really critical time when I needed her to be passionate about her husband's death.
Yeah. Something I heard when looking into this money thing was that because because his death was ruled a suicide, I think there's some insurance or benefit provision that didn't kick in. So the $300,000 check was what he would have, something like it, what he would have received had he died in killed in action or in a performance of his duties. What's your take on that?
I've heard multiple. She had told me, Job's wife had told me, that she didn't get his benefits because he had committed suicide.
Right.
Now I have heard since that she has received those benefits.
Oh.
I don't know that. I haven't seen the check. I haven't seen the deposit, but I was told that those benefits had been paid out. Again, I don't know. I didn't look into his life insurance and what the stipulations were on suicide or anything like that. And I know that in most life insurance policies, that after a period of time where you're paying your premium, if you commit suicide, you're still going to get your payment. But I was told they didn't get it, and then I've been told since, and it's been 4 years since she's been participating. So I've heard that since in those 4 years that payment has been given to her, and in addition to the money that she received from Mike Hayes.
Yeah. How many commanding officers in the global war on terrorism committed suicide in theater?
0, other than, well, the allegation of Job Price is the only one that has ever happened.
Job is the only one that,
yeah. And that's clearly not what happened, but that's the, there's, and I sent you the link if anybody wants to look it up. The Mike Ritlin, I don't know what the name of his podcast is, but he was a SEAL, canine SEAL guy.
Yeah.
He had on what's it called? Mic drop. Yeah. He had a retired SEAL officer on.
Bob Harward.
What's his name?
Bob Harward.
Bob Harward. Who I don't know anything about. I just saw the post, and then someone sent me the link and said, go to the 111 mark on the video, and he talks about Job Price. Well, again, the more times Job Price's name is said, the better. Even in a negative, if his name becomes common, then that's a good thing. But up until Rob Huberty going out on Mike Ritlin's podcast and crush Job, other than him, there's very, very few people other than me and Eric Deming now talking about Job Price. It's just odd to me that out of nowhere, some retired old SEAL talking about a mission he was supposed to plan, and had he gone through with the plan, they all would have probably died, and how he wouldn't have been able to live with himself.
And I don't know if you knew Job Price.
I didn't know him. I mean, I of course remember the whole story, and I was even saying,
I think that's exactly what he went through. Those guys, he planned that mission, those guys get killed. He comes back to his hooch and took his life.
Are you familiar with the controversy around that?
No.
I've heard, and it's, of course, I mean, the whole thing isn't mainstream outside of our community, but even within our community, I've heard rumblings of that it wasn't suicide, that it was a botched, or not botched, but it was an assassination, that's not what happened, and that there's some controversy as to what actually happened. I don't know much about it. I've heard like whispers of it here and there, but
I've heard, and he's Naval Academy guy, had been doing a tremendous job, well respected and all, and so I haven't heard any of that. Someone at one point I heard something about family life, but I think based on the timing of the guy's losing his life and having experienced what I went through, Adam, that I could feel that. I could understand his thinking. I'm not sure if Adam Curtis and that helicopter had all been killed, I'm not so sure I wouldn't have been in that same place with Job. So I could relate to all of that, understand the pressures and the responsibility he felt with that, growing up in a culture from his leadership at the Naval Academy, where you're responsible, accountable for your people, and then that. So I have to believe that's ground truth, not some other conspiracy theory, but I haven't heard any of those details.
But that was not a very organic conversation. That seemed almost placed. And I'm not sure to what value, but I do know that historically, when challenged, they can't stop themselves from responding. So Rob O'Neill did 10 months after we did our last show, did a podcast where he railed against me and Jeremy, called me a jackwagon, said that I think he was law enforcement. I was a cop for 30 years. There's like 30 pages of Google about me. You can find whatever you want about me.
Yeah.
He's like, and the only thing I do know for certain is his wife is probably fat and ugly. My wife's a smoke show. Right? She giggled when I showed her that. So they can't help themselves but respond. because their egos are so big.
Right.
So when the heat is coming out on Job and his name and the people that were associated with his deployment become known, they're going to start saying things about Job, and they'll increase it. They'll throw little ones out like this, but there's going to be more coming out. Mike Hayes in his book, which is a shit book, and everybody writes their leadership book when they're an officer and the SEAL gets out.
Right.
Somehow being a bestseller. I have a theory on that, but he mentions Job in his book. Job wasn't even mentioned on the news when he died, right? There's nothing about Job. And it wasn't until 2016 when New York Times did a real shitty job writing an article that was supposed to be an expose on Job's suspicious death and turned into a woe is me, poor sad SEAL kills himself.
Right. Depressed SEAL, yeah.
So you're going to start to see, again, patterns. They always. Jocko, after Eric came out and accused him of war crimes, did 2 podcasts in response to that.
Yep.
Not addressing any of the stuff that Eric talked about, right? Not addressing the fact that Eric said he killed a guy for no reason. Didn't address that, but he addressed the environment of Ramadi during that period of time in order to somehow make it okay for what they did. So they all do it. So the fact that Job's name is coming out is good for us because that means they're starting to feel the heat. And I will say this, and I was holding onto this, and I've tried my best to do this the professional way, but so Pete Hegseth, and again, Seth, you and I have talked. We are not politically on the same persuasion, but I'm unified in the fact that all persuasions are fucking corrupt in our government. I don't think there isn't an honest one. There isn't someone who hasn't been touched by the corruption bug. I think they're all dirty. And the Tim Szymanski was grew up with the Bidens. Like he's interconnected with the Clintons and the Bidens and Trump and everybody. Everybody's interconnected. It's like an incestuous marriage. It's just horrible. So when Pete Hegseth was with Fox, I had been introduced to him through a mutual friend, and I said, "Listen, I need help getting Job's case some light." Sent him everything. He read it all. Came back and said, "Yeah, this looks really bad on the Navy. There's no doubt what they're saying isn't true." He said to me, "Yeah, everything looks like it definitely wasn't suicide." So he's been very open with me,
right,
in that capacity, and he was going to help me introduce me to a bunch of print and legacy media editors and yada yada. And then all of a sudden, ghost.
This was when he was just so I'm clear. This was when he was at Fox News. This was long before Trump was reelected.
Yep.
Okay.
It was in 2023.
Okay.
22, 23. I can go back and check. April-ish of 23, I think. And I said, "Listen, dude, I understand you're a busy guy, that you got a lot going on. But I said, I really need some connects." He said, "Well, I'll do an op-ed for Fox Digital. It's the best I can do for you." So I wrote something and didn't get picked up. And I said, "All right." And he goes, "Listen, man, I'm sorry I couldn't do more, but maybe down the road in a different capacity, I can help you." Okay. Again, I was told that he went to Rob O'Neill, who's a personal friend of his, and said, "Hey, do you know anything about this Joe Price case?" And this is before I interviewed Rob. And he was told to leave it alone. And that's why he stopped. That's what I was told. Not from Pete, but from another person who knows Rob. So I've been reaching out to Pete since he became the Secretary of Defense, saying, "Listen," sending screenshots. I'm like, "This is that moment. Yeah. When you said at some other point in time, in some other capacity, you might be able to help me. You're now in that capacity. Now's the time. You've seen all the evidence." The beginning of it. He didn't even know all the new evidence with the forensic stuff. But I said, just from what you've seen, that it's not right. You even said to me it didn't look like suicide. You said to me it looks real bad in the Navy. Why don't we fix this? So I'm hoping Pete sees this, because, and I've said this from the day I started, and I'll say it until it's over, that my only goal is to make Harry Price whole, even after his death, so that he knows that I completed the mission, that it's been proven that his son did not take his own life. Harry is not a vengeful man. I lie. He's kind of vengeful. But with this, towards the end, he just wanted his son's name cleared. He wasn't looking for a pound of flesh. Bronwyn, I think, might still be looking for a pound of flesh. But for me personally, and I'm the one that's got thousands of hours invested into this with for free. And again, I would never accept $1 for it, but it is a lot. I mean, I have a family, and there's been a lot of sacrifices on my end to try to get this thing to the finish line. If Pete Hegseth were to call me and say, "Hey, Matt, yes, we had this conversation. Yes, that did happen. Yes, we need to solve that problem, but we can't do it publicly. We can't have a press release saying Navy SEALs killed their commander in 2012. But I can change his manner of death from suicide to murder without any fanfare, without anything. And I just need you to shut the fuck up and sign this NDA, and we'll do that." I would do that tomorrow. I would go away. I don't care about Rob O'Neill or Mark Luttrell, or I love Lori Chapman Long Fritz, but I don't know John. Like that, and that doesn't need Matt Cubbler, right? That's a solved case. That just needs a really good PR team and a movie. It doesn't need me to be their champion. I just happen to be the guy that's got the voice at the moment that doesn't mind taking the arrows, right? So but I would walk tomorrow with that one single thing that is just a computer edit, and I would be done, because then I would have served the mission to the completion as I promised Harry. So that would be that. I pray that Pete hears this. I've sent him a dozen texts, no response. He's a busy guy, I get it, but I don't have the luxury of waiting for his timetable, if there even is one, if it's even on the list. And I need this solved, because I'm tired. I've been at this a long time, and I know, with all the new forensic evidence that we have, and the documentary in production, and all of that. And again, the documentary, I will walk from. I'm no longer, my contract with them can be over if I need it to be. I want to do a documentary, but the documentary would survive without me.
Right.
They could take everything. I gave them everything already. Use it. I don't have to be on it.
Right.
I just really want this to be over. But until it is, I'm willing to burn the bridge of the whole village if I have to, just to get Job justice.
Matt, thanks so much for joining me. That was a great conversation. Thank you.
Anytime, buddy. I appreciate it. And you're one of the few good guys that I trust. And there's not a big list. So
thanks.